So the title of my sermon, for those of you who are going to pull out your phones and start tweeting, sharing things about the sermon, is Getting Our House in Order. And I want to start by filing a formal complaint about that opening collect, the opening prayer that says, "Please, Lord, help us to always think and do the right thing." Always think and do the right thing. And then in Ephesians, Paul says, be imitators of God. Have no anger or malice or hatred in you ever. Every word that drips from your mouth is full of grace to build up others. Does it sound like an impossible task to you to always think and do? Thank you. Well, my sermon today is coming from a podcast that I first heard while driving up to Tahoe and listened again driving back from Tahoe because I needed a sermon. And it comes to you from the podcast called On Being. It's led by Krista Tippett. She's 60 years old. It's an NPR, put on by NPR, and she went to seminary at this great school in Connecticut. So she comes from the Christian tradition, and she interviews spiritual teachers, leaders from a variety of backgrounds. And her guest sometime recently was one of the famous American Buddhist teacher named Sharon Salzberg. She's right up there. She and Jack Kornfield and another man started a meditation school in Massachusetts in the Buddhist tradition. And it was sort of about how to get our minds clear and full of peace in such difficult and trying times. Coincidentally, this morning, as I was praying about this sermon, up on the New York Times, one of the top stories was dealing with COVID rage, that there is an epidemic of COVID rage, more serious types, road ragey, as well as just the average garden variety rage. So this is a timely topic. And she was saying, how do we do this? How do we find this mental balance in a time when everything's out of our control? And so Sharon Salzberg started talking about our minds. Now, remember, Buddhists talk a lot about working in our minds. It's a focus for them, is fixing our thoughts. And she said one of the teachings is that our mind is the house of pure radiance. The house of pure radiance. Well, in Christian terms, we would call that the mind of Christ, that we have the mind of Christ. Or, like Ephesians says, we are imitators of God. Not perfect imitators of God, but imitators nonetheless. So that our head is like a house. And I could get into that metaphor because there's a Christian tradition, a long-standing Christian tradition about our mind being a house of God. But then the problem is that this house of pure radiance is attacked by opposing forces that are always going to come at the front door. And it's sort of like the letters coming at Hogwarts for Harry at the house with his uncle, the Dursleys. You know how those letters just fly in the house, blah, 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 and if you don't let them in, they're just going to keep attacking. So she said, unfortunately, you cannot say, I'm going to ignore this opposing force. You have to deal with it. Now, what are these opposing forces? They are things like fear, hatred, self-doubt, grief, sorrow. Think of all the things that are hard to deal with in your mind, as opposed to the good things like joy and love and so on. All those things that are going to assail every mind pretty much every day to a certain extent. And she said, you cannot shut the door and say, no, I will not deal with it. There is no fear, there is no anxiety, there's no worry, there's no hate. She said, and instead, what you have to do, this is in her Buddhist teaching, is that you have to open the door and remember who owns the house. You own the house. The opposing force does not. You are the house of pure radiance. Think mind of Christ. You are the mind of Christ. And this thing is coming to bother you. Not kill you, but take over the house like the relative who wants to come live with you. And you don't want them to. So she calls one of her visitors Lucy. So Lucy is the voice, her self-critical voice. And she said, Lucy knocks at the door, and I open the door and say, there you are again, Lucy, the self-critical voice of my life. And Lucy wants to come in for a cup of tea. And she says, no, Lucy, I will get you a cup of tea to go. And we're going to have a talk about why I'm talking again to Lucy, the self-critical voice in my mind, and then you're going to go away. So she said, you have to not let it in your house because then it possesses you. Now, as a Christian, I'm processing going, wow, there are all those Bible verses about not letting, who owns the house, Beelzebub or you, or who's coming in the night to seize your house. And I was reminded of the great saint Teresa of Avila, who writes about the interior castle. She talks about our mind, our spirit, as an interior castle. And she lived in medieval times where castles had outer courtyards and then inner courtyards, and in the innermost courtyard lived the lord of the fiefdom. And in her schema, there were sort of outer areas of prayer, and then as you got more inward, you became more contemplative, and you had perfect union with God, the Lord, inside your interior castle. Well, the medieval thing didn't work for me. So what I came up with was a mansion. I know what a mansion looks like, and a modern mansion, having all the things. Here's the indoor pool, and here's the golden ballroom, and here's the cool TV room, and here's the master bedroom with the jacuzzi, and imagine the marble floors. Just pick the mansion that is your head, and you live in that mansion, and you don't want undesirable thoughts coming into that mansion, but they are going to come. How do you deal with that? What she said is that one of the reasons that we struggle so much with these things that assail us and eventually turn into the anti-Ephesians, eventually turn into getting angry at one another, having COVID rage, is that we lack compassion for ourselves. The number one problem that people usually experience when they start meditating is that they start experiencing whatever, the fear, the worry, the anger, whatever it might be, and then they start judging themselves for feeling that. And then they start judging themselves for judging the feelings. In other words, they criticize themselves for not meditating well. And so they get into this cycle. That's Lucy, the self-critical teacher at the door. So she said, well, the first thing you have to learn is self-compassion. Love yourself. Remember, love, be loved. That's our motto. It is very difficult to accept that we are loved. That's why Paul writes, you are beloved children of God. He says, be imitators of God like the beloved children of God that you are. So, in Christian terms, I would say what she's teaching us is that we have to remember that we are the beloved children of God. And that house of pure radiance, that mansion that I love so much, is the house that God gave me to live in. And God lives there too. And we are all equally beloved children of God, even people we don't think are so beloved. She says that when we can have compassion towards ourselves, then those things, first of all, can't overpower our minds. They're going to come every day, by the way. But they can't overpower us. We're going to turn them away at the door. And then we are able to do all those things that Ephesians says, to be able to speak in loving kindness to one another, to have compassion for one another. First, it has to happen for ourselves, and then them. So I'll give you an illustration. She gave some illustrations. She talked about her Lucy, the visitor, the self-critical visitor. And I recognize this in an experience in Tahoe. I was riding along the west shore of Lake Tahoe in bike lanes with my brother-in-law and my sister. And it's two bike lanes with a yellow line in the middle, much like a country road with a yellow line in the middle. And you're supposed to stay to the right, and slow people stay to the right. And if you're going faster than the other pedestrians or cyclists, you're supposed to pass on the left when safe. So in other words, not when there's a curve, not when there are faster people behind you or whatever. Pass when safe. It's just like driving. I know these rules well. I like to enforce these rules when I'm riding around Lake Miramar. I get mad at people who don't pay attention to the cycling and walking rules. But there I was riding with my brother-in-law, and he and I had been having fun passing all the electric bikes because we were on regular human-powered bikes. So we were enjoying cycling faster. And then suddenly we came upon a family. It was a little girl on a trainer bike. She could have only been 3.5 or 4, and 2 women behind her, maternal figures. And suddenly they were in the path in front of us. So we slowed down, And we were on a curve, and my brother-in-law, who is a kamikaze skier, just passed them on a curve. And I thought for a minute, and then I thought, okay, I'll pass, what the heck, he's doing it, I'm going to do it too. So I passed on a curve and nearly ran into, I'm just going to say, a couple older than I am, I'll put it that way. A couple older than I am, coming the opposite direction. I was in their lane, but kind of right in the middle. And there was a little girl, and the woman who was in front yelled, "Ah!" And I immediately said, sorry. And I looked down at the little girl and the mother, like, sorry. And my sister's yelling at me. She's behind me. Don't pass on a curve. And the man was mad at me too, and just kind of, whoa, they didn't say anything horrible, but they were just very frustrated with me. So I just kept riding on, going, I'm sorry. I spent the next 11 miles home castigating myself for 3 seconds of misjudgment. I should have just waited for the little girl to get into a straight a straight pathway, right? Should have just waited. But no, I turned and apologized to my sister because she was mad at me for doing it. And then the whole way home, like, why are you doing that? You get mad when other people do that. I ruined the whole ride home. And then, as I was driving home from vacation, and I'm listening to Sharon Salzberg, her little teaching about keeping that pure radiance, of our mind, I remember that moment, and I feel the pang of regret, like, what an idiot. I said, I have to have compassion. It was a 3-second mistake. And you find out really fast when you're passing in someone else's lane. Big mistake. But it's over. And how many years of not doing that have I had in my life? But notice what the human mind does. It will just say, oh, you made a huge mistake. How horrible. So you have to have compassion for ourselves first so that we can then have that compassionate mind towards other people. I'll give you another example of what we can do with our minds. So here I was going to bed last night thinking, okay, I'll kind of preach on the Ephesians thing. And now I just want a good night's sleep. But it's a summer night, so all the windows are open. And in my neighborhood, some of my neighbors like to come out late at night, around midnight, and converse because it's hot and they want to be outside. And this has given me consternation, I'll say. Moments of frustration on late Saturday nights when other people are partying, but I'm getting ready to work. I want my good night's sleep. So I hear the neighbors, and I'm like, just peace out, Janine. Don't worry about it. You'll get to sleep eventually. And just as I turn off the light, I hear in the canyon next to me, oh, a coyote, oh, and then another one answers, oh, and then not to be outdone, the little dog that lives behind me goes, ruff, 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 ruff. And then the German Shepherd 2 doors down behind me goes, oh, 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 oh. It was just like a concert of dogs singing to one another. And coyotes can go an hour, right? So I just thought, I can choose how I experience this. I have the house of pure radiance in my mansion, and I'm just going to lie down, I'm going to pray, and maybe God will grant me a little sleep. And I closed my eyes, and in a miracle minute, the dogs died down, and the neighbors, to my shock, went inside. We Christians have the trump card, and it's Jesus. It's prayer. Because what that mansion needs is a security system. And I think of Jesus as a security system. Now, many of you who are practiced in prayer have probably used Jesus as protection. You have a protection prayer, like, Jesus, cover me with your protection. Well, in my mansion, I imagine that Jesus has all those sensors, and he's a security system. Now, what does a security system do? It alerts you where there's an intruder or a problem. Tells you, hey, Critical Lucy's at the front door again. Don't let her in. And it summons help. It summons people to help you through the emergency. And what we get with the body of Christ is 2 things. One, the literal body of Christ, the one who said, I give my flesh to the world, teaches us that these sufferings that we experience in our mind are just the way life goes. It's just going to happen. You're going to have bad thoughts. But Jesus is teaching us that there's deliverance. That's the news of the resurrection. There is freedom and deliverance from it. You may have to summon it every day, but there is freedom and deliverance from the barking coyotes and the stupid mistake you made on the bike path, right? Then the other thing is this body of Christ, this flesh of Christ. That what we learn from practicing our Christianity is that we are not alone in this struggle. Sharon Salzberg had to learn in her Buddhist tradition as well, she had to learn that she was not the only one who had thoughts assailing her that she had to deal with. But we as Christians, we actively emphasize communal practice. The gathering for worship, the being in small groups, the studying Bibles together, praying together, being online and Facebook together. We do this because it reminds us that we are not alone. And where we're enraged at the neighbors talking outside at midnight, we can talk with fellow Christians about what it's like to catch that thought and say, I don't want you in my mansion of pure radiance tonight. We can share with them what is going on. And then we realize, hey, we're just human. By receiving compassion from one another in our small groups or our coffee hours, however we're doing it, the person we call up when we're mad, we learn to have that compassion for ourselves. And we can do a better job of getting our house in order. So think of it like the game of Clue. Anger is in the kitchen with the knife, right? Envy is in the garage with the candlestick. You think of it as hunting through that house. What is in there that does not wish me to be at peace with myself and others? It's time for house cleaning.